Tal v. Santos. Facts: on June 18, 1989, the Federation of Associations of Barangay Councils of Catanduanes, composed of 11 members, convened with 6 members in attendance for the purpose of holding the election of its officers. The election proceeded with petitioner Ruperto Tal declared as president. The governor, Leandro Versal, sent a letter to respondent Luis Santos, secretary of DILG, protesting the election of the officers of the FABC on the ground of certain irregularities. Tal, as president of FABC, filed his comment on the protest of governor denying the alleged irregularities and denouncing the governor's acts of meddling and intervening in the election. Secretary Santos nullified the election of the officers of FABC and ordered the conduct of anyone. In the present petitioner for certiorari, petitioner seeks the reversal of the resolutions of the respondent secretary. Issue: 1. The Cumlic has jurisdiction over election contests involving the election of officers of the FABC. Held no ratio, under Article 9, c. Section 2 of the 1987 Consti, the Cumlic shall exercise exclusive original jurisdiction over all contests relating to the elections, returns, and qualifications of all elective regional, provincial, and city officials, and appellate jurisdiction over all contests involving elective municipal officials decided by trial courts of general jurisdiction, or involving elective barangay officials decided by trial courts of limited jurisdiction. The 1987 Constitution expanded the jurisdiction of the Cumlic by granting it appellate jurisdiction over all contests involving elective municipal officials decided by trial courts of general jurisdiction or elective barangay officials decided by trial courts of limited jurisdiction. The jurisdiction of the Cumlic over contests involving elective barangay officials is limited to appellate jurisdiction from decisions of the trial courts. The jurisdiction of the Cumlic is over popular elections, the elected officials of which are determined through the will of the electorate. An election is the embodiment of the popular will, the expression of the sovereign power of the people. Specifically, the term election, in the context of the Constitution, may refer to the conduct of the polls, including the listing of voters, the holding of the electoral campaign, and the casting and counting of the votes which do not characterize the election of officers in the Katipunan and GMGA barangay. Issue: 1. The Secretary has jurisdiction over the elections contests involving the FABC elections. Held no ratio, the Secretary of Local Government is not vested with jurisdiction to entertain any protest involving the election of officers of the FABC. There is no question that he is vested with the power to promulgate rules and regulations as set forth in Section 222 of the LGC and the Administrative Code. Now the question that arises is whether or not a violation of said circular vests jurisdiction upon the respondent secretary, as claimed by him, to hear a protest filed in relation thereto and consequently declare an election null and void. It is a well-settled principle of administrative law that unless expressly empowered, administrative agencies are bereft of quasi-judicial powers. The jurisdiction of administrative authorities is dependent entirely upon the provisions of the statutes reposing power in them. They cannot confer it upon themselves. Such jurisdiction is essential to give validity to their determinations. There is neither a statutory nor constitutional provision expressly or even by necessary implication conferring upon the Secretary of Local Government the power to assume jurisdiction over an election protest involving officers of the Katipunan and GMGA barangay. Presidential power over local governments is limited by the Constitution to the exercise of general supervision to ensure that local affairs are administered according to law. The general supervision is exercised by the President through the Secretary of Local Government. Supervision vs. control. In administrative law, supervision means overseeing or the power or authority of an officer to see that the subordinate officers perform their duties. If the latter fails or neglects to fulfill them, the former may take such action or step as prescribed by law to make them perform their duties. Control, on the other hand, means the power of an officer to alter or modify or nullify or set aside what a subordinate officer had done in the performance of his duties and to substitute the judgment of the former for that of the latter. The fundamental law permits the chief executive to wield no more authority than that of checking whether said local government or the officers thereof perform their duties as provided by statutory enactments. Hence, the President cannot interfere with local governments so long as the same or its officers act within the scope of their authority. Supervisory power, when contrasted with control, is the power of mere oversight over an inferior body. It does not include any restraining authority over such body. Construing the constitutional limitation on the power of general supervision of the President over local governments. We hold that Secretary has no authority to pass upon the validity or regularity of the election of the officers of the Katipunan. To allow the Secretary to do so will give him more power than the law or the Constitution grants. It will in effect give him control over local government officials, for it will permit him to interfere in a purely democratic and nonpartisan activity aimed at strengthening the Baranawi as the basic component of local governments so that the ultimate goal of fullest autonomy may be achieved. In fact, his order that the new elections to be conducted be presided by the regional director is a clear and direct interference by the department with the political affairs of the Baranawis, which is not permitted by the limitation of presidential power to general supervision over local governments. Indeed, it is the policy of the state to ensure the autonomy of local governments. To deny the Secretary of Local Government the power to review the regularity of the elections of officers of the Katipunan would be to enhance the avowed state policy of promoting the autonomy of local governments. The RTCs have the exclusive original jurisdiction to hear the protest. Issue 1. The Governor has the personality to file the protest. Held yes ratio, the Governor has the personality to file the protest. Under Section 205 of the Local Government Code, the membership of the Sangguniang Panlalawigan consists of the Governor, the Vice-Governor, elective members of the said Sangguniang and the Presidents of the Katipunan Panlalawigan and the Kabataan Baranawi Provincial Federation. The Governor acts as the presiding officer of the Sangguniang Panlalawigan. As presiding officer of the Sangguniang Panlalawigan, the respondent governor has an interest in the election of the officers of the FABC since its elected president becomes a member of the assembly. If the president of the FABC assumes his presidency under questionable circumstances and is allowed to sit in the Sangguniang Panlalawigan, the official actions of the Sangguniang may be vulnerable to attacks as to their validity or legality. Hence, respondent governor is a proper party to question the regularity of the elections of the officers of the FABC. Issue 1. The election was valid, held no ratio. The elections were declared null and void primarily for failure to comply with Section 2.4 of DLG Circular No. 8909, which provides that the incumbent FABC president or the vice president shall preside over the reorganizational meeting, there being a quorum. The rule specifically provides that it is the incumbent FABC president or vice president who shall preside over the meeting. The word shall should be taken in its ordinary signification, i.e., it must be imperative or mandatory and not merely permissive, as the rule is explicit and requires no other interpretation. If it had been intended that any other official should preside, the rules would have provided so, as it did in the elections at the town and city levels as well as the regional level. It is admitted that neither the incumbent FABC president nor the vice president presided over the meeting and elections, but Alberto P. Molina, Jr., the chairman of the Board of Election Supervisors/Consultants. Thus, there was a clear violation of the aforesaid mandatory provision. On this ground, the elections should be nullified. In case at bar, PGOO Molina, the chairman of the board, presided over the elections. there was direct participation by the chairman of the board in the elections contrary to what is dictated by the rules. Worse, there was no board of election supervisors to oversee the elections in view of the walkout staged by its two other members, the provincial Cumlic supervisor and the provincial treasurer. The objective of keeping the election free and honest was therefore compromised. Issue 1. The President's appointment given to Augusto Antonio as temporary representative of the FABC was valid. Held no ratio. In the present controversy involving the Sangguniang Panlalawigan, the law is likewise explicit. To be appointed by the President of the Philippines to sit in the Sangguniang Panlalawigan is the President of the Katipunang Panlalawigan. The appointee must meet the qualifications set by law. The appointing power is bound by law to comply with the requirements as to the basic qualifications of the appointee to the Sangguniang Panlalawigan. The President of the Philippines or his alter ego, the Secretary of Local Government, has no authority to appoint anyone who does not meet the minimum qualification to be the President of the Federation of Barangay Councils. Augusto Antonio is not the President of the Federation. He is a member of the Federation, but he was not even present during the elections despite notice. The argument that Antonio was appointed as a remedial measure in the exigency of the service cannot be sustained. Since Antonio does not meet the basic qualification of being President of the Federation, his appointment to the Sangguniang Panlalawigan is not justified, notwithstanding that such appointment is merely in a temporary capacity. If the intention of the respondent secretary was to protect the interest of the Federation in the Sangguniang, he should have appointed the incumbent FABC president in a holdover capacity. For even under the guidelines, the term of office of officers of the Katipunan at all levels shall be from the date of their election until their successors shall have been duly elected and qualified, without prejudice to the terms of their appointments as members of the Sangguniang to which they may be correspondingly appointed. Since the election is still under protest such that no successor of the incumbent has as yet qualified, the respondent secretary has no choice but to have the incumbent FABC president sit as member of the Sangguniang. He could even have appointed petitioner since he was elected the president of the Federation but not Antonio. The appointment of Antonio, allegedly the protege of respondent governor, gives credence to petitioner's charge of political interference by respondent governor in the organization. This should not be allowed. The barangays should be insulated from any partisan activity or political intervention if only to give true meaning to local autonomy.